Here's another email to Mark Zuckerberg. It says, subject line, COVID misinformation, Wuhan lab leak theory. In response to continued public pressure and tense conversations with the new administration, we started removing 5 COVID claims, including the lab leak theory. Mr. Zuckerberg responds, this seems like a good reminder that when we compromise our standards due to pressure from an administration in either direction, we often later regret it. Why was it so important the virus not have started in a lab?
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to America Wake. I'm Wilson. You just watched a heated exchange between Jim Jordan and Dr. Fauci, and I have to say, this is the kind of hearing a lot of Americans have been waiting to see. What stood out to me was how Jordan kept pushing for answers on questions that many people still have years later. Questions about the virus's origins, government transparency, and whether certain viewpoints were unfairly dismissed before all the facts were known. No matter where you stand on the lab leak debate, I think most people can agree that asking questions should never be off limits. That's why this exchange caught my attention. Jordan wasn't just challenging Fauci. He was challenging the narrative that seemed to dominate the conversation for years. Before we get into my full reaction, make sure you like this video, subscribe to America Wake, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest content. Now, let's get into it.
Gentleman's time's expired. Now recognize Mr. Jordan from Ohio for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, why was it so important that the virus not have started in a lab?
We don't know where it started, and that's the reason why I keep an open mind. So I don't know what you mean by why was it so important. It wasn't important.
Well, you still don't know where it started? The guys you gave money to figured it out in 3 days.
No.
Mr. Anderson said on January 31st, 2020, virus looks engineered, virus not consistent with evolutionary theory. The very next day, Dr. Gary said, I don't know how this happens in nature. It'd be easy to do in a lab. And then 3 days later, Shazam, they switch and say it has to be nature. So they figured it out in 3 days, but you still don't know?
No, in fact, if you look at what they were saying, Congressman Jordan, they were saying that it was not a manufactured virus. It still could have evolved out of a lab.
Well, let me read something here to you.
They're not incompatible.
In our study on the censorship of the Biden administration working with big tech, I want to read you a WhatsApp message from Mark Zuckerberg. Can we include that the White House put pressure on us to censor the lab leak theory? So this is a communication on July 16th, 2021. Nick Clegg, Joel Kaplan, Sheryl Sandberg, Mark Zuckerberg. They're certainly feeling the pressure to downplay any lab leak theory and go with the natural origin theory.
Is there a question there?
One's coming. Here's another email to Mark Zuckerberg. It says, subject line, COVID misinformation, Wuhan lab leak theory. In response to continued public pressure and tense conversations with the new administration, we started removing 5 COVID claims, including the lab leak theory. Mr. Zuckerberg responds, this seems like a good reminder that when we compromise our standards due to pressure from an administration in either direction, we often later regret it. Why was it so important the virus not have started in a lab?
Wasn't so important that the virus not. We don't know. We know
it was important to someone in the Biden administration, so much so that the top people at Meta, the top people at Facebook are asking, why are we getting all this pressure to downplay the lab leak theory? And we have an email from June of the same year, June 4th, 2021, saying the same thing. It was certainly important to somebody.
Well, what has that got to do with me?
I'm asking you because you're the expert on the coronavirus. I'm saying why was the administration so pushing not to have the lab leak theory as something that was viable?
I can answer that. I've kept an open mind throughout the entire process.
You kept an open mind. Dr. Fauci, open mind.
That is correct.
What happened in those 3 days? Why did Dr. Anderson and Mr. Anderson and Dr. Gary, why did they change their mind in 180 degrees? Because what Christian Anderson says 3 days later, after he said virus looks engineered, virus not consistent with evolutionary theory, 3 days later he says the main crackpot theories going around at the moment relate to this virus being somehow engineered, and that is demonstrably false. How did they figure all that out in 3 days, Dr. Fauci?
You can do that.
You still have an open mind.
Well, what they did is that they testified before this committee. What they did, they went back and looked at the sequences and realized that their initial concern was unfounded about that, and it did not look at all like it was manufactured. But as they said in their paper, even though they feel it was more likely—
3 days, they figured it out.
That's exactly. You could do that in 3 days. You can scan sequences in a day. You don't need 3 days.
Okay, who's Robert Redfield?
The former director of the CDC.
Dr. Redfield, right? And he was also on the coronavirus task force. Is that accurate?
He was a member of the coronavirus task force.
And here's what he said to this committee. He said, Redfield said that Fauci and Collins left him out because Redfield suspected that coronavirus had leaked from the Chinese lab. Is that accurate?
Well, he said that, but that's not true. That is incorrect, Congressman.
Dr. Redfield's lying to the committee when he sat right where you sat?
When he said that I kept him out, that is an incorrect statement. The roster who was on the phone
was Dr. Redfield in that conference call on February 1st when you had Mr. Anderson and Dr. Gary on that call?
He was not. And the conference call was put together by Jeremy Farrar. So no one kept him out. He said he was kept out because
Did U.S. tax dollars...
You want me to answer the question?
Yeah, I would just wonder why he wasn't on the call. It seems to me the head of CDC, part of the coronavirus task force, which was formed 2 days prior to that call, would have been on the call.
Well, the call was arranged by Jeremy Farrar. You should ask him.
Okay. Did U.S. tax dollars flow through a grant recipient to the lab in China?
I'm sorry. What was?
Did U.S. tax dollars flow through a grant recipient to the lab in China?
Yes, of course. It was a subaward to the Wuhan Institute.
And who approved that award?
Excuse me?
And who approved that award? What agency approved that award?
National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases.
Your agency approved that, right?
Yes, it did. After.
Did that have anything to do with this downplaying of the lab leak theory?
No.
Nothing to do with it.
Nothing.
What do you agree that there was a push to downplay the lab leak theory?
Not on my part.
Really?
Really?
Wow.
Wow.
I think most of the country would find that amazing. I still got 11 seconds.
Well, look at the facts. I've kept an open mind throughout the entire process.
All right. I yield back.
I now recognize the majority.
After watching that entire exchange, I think Jim Jordan made a strong case for why so many Americans remain skeptical about how the COVID origin story was handled. One of the biggest moments was Jordan pointing to the early comments from scientists who initially thought the virus looked unusual and possibly engineered. Then, just days later, those same concerns seemed to disappear. Jordan's question was simple: what changed so quickly? That's a fair question. Science is supposed to welcome scrutiny and debate. When major conclusions shift rapidly, people naturally want to know why. The discussion about social media censorship was also important. Jordan referenced internal communications suggesting that tech companies felt pressure to downplay discussion of the lab leak theory. Whether you agree with the theory or not, that should concern anyone who values open discussion. What makes this issue even more interesting is that the lab leak theory was once treated as something that shouldn't even be discussed. Today, many experts and agencies acknowledge it as a legitimate possibility. That alone raises questions about how the conversation was managed in the early days. I also found the exchange about former CDC Director Robert Redfield interesting. Redfield claimed he was left out of key discussions because of his views on the virus's origins. Fauci denied that. But the disagreement itself shows there was not as much consensus behind the scenes as the public may have believed. Then Jordan turned to the funding issue. Fauci acknowledged that U.S. taxpayer money reached the Wuhan lab through a grant recipient. That does not prove the virus came from a lab, but it certainly gives the public a reason to ask questions and demand accountability. What stood out to me most was Jordan's frustration with the repeated claim that Fauci kept an open mind. Jordan's argument seemed to be that if everyone truly had an open mind, why were alternative theories so aggressively pushed aside for so long? To me, that's the central issue. This hearing was about more than the lab leak theory. It was about transparency, credibility, and public trust. Whether you agree with Jordan or Fauci, trust in public institutions depends on people believing they are getting the full story. When questions go unanswered, skepticism is inevitable. In my view, Jordan did what elected officials are supposed to do. He asked tough questions and pressed for answers on issues that still matter to millions of Americans. But that's my opinion. Let me know yours in the comments. Did Jim Jordan make valid points? Or do you think Fauci answered the questions effectively? If you enjoyed this breakdown, be sure to like, subscribe, and share the video. I'm Wilson. This is America Wake, and I'll see you in the next one.